Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler here, one of the programmers here at the Green Film Festival of San Francisco. You've just had a chance to see the really wonderful film Dark Circle, and we're lucky enough to have one of the co-directors here, Judy Irving. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you.
And for those who don't know, Judy's a longtime Bay Area filmmaker, and so we don't always have the chance to kind of celebrate our filmmakers in our own backyard, so it's kind of neat when things work out what we can. Um, you know, um, as we were kind of programming things for the festival, we often kind of look back and figure out films that maybe came out in previous years that we want audiences to have a chance to kind of either rediscover or kind of see for the first time. Kind of traveling back, what was the kind of catalyst for deciding to kind of make this film originally?
Originally, I really related to the life and death of Karen Silkwood. Um, she was my age. She worked in a plutonium in a factory that made fuel rods for the Hanford reactors, and she discovered bad welds in the fuel rods, and she was on her way to a New York Times reporter when she was pushed off the road by the Kerr-McGee officials, I'm sure of it, and killed. So that's how it started in 74. And in 75, I did a bunch of research on nuclear power and then moved into nuclear weapons and became as obsessed with the whole issue and the links between nuclear power and nuclear weapons that the government doesn't want us to know about over those intervening years, and then finally started shooting the film called Dark Circle, which you just saw, in 78, finished it in 82. And our aim was to show what those links are and to also show the impact of the nuclear industry, both sides of it, nuclear and weapons, so that people wouldn't be hoodwinked by the official propaganda that they were so separate.
And at that time, I mean, what, as you'd done a lot of research, as you started kind of telling your story, telling the story on film, what were some of the things that most surprised you that you didn't expect as you started making the film?
Well, we were in Denver shooting another film about Chicanos in politics. And this is in, I can't remember what year, 77 or something like that. And discovered by reading a magazine article that there was plutonium in the soil and plutonium in the water supply of Denver. And there we were drinking the water, so that was a big surprise. I had done mostly research into nuclear power by then, and all of a sudden we just got immersed in nuclear weapons because this plutonium contamination in the whole area was coming from the Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plant, which you just saw a whole lot about. Ironically enough, once the film was finished, it was censored from PBS. Apple Pie PBS kept it off the air for 7 years. And it was finally shown on POV, which is a PBS national documentary series, in 1989. And coincidentally, the FBI raided Rocky Flats 2 weeks after that broadcast, making it look like we had influenced the government. It didn't actually happen that way. There was a DOE engineer, Department of Energy, and engineer who had been checking things out at Rocky Flats, and he got contaminated. It was such a bad scene there. They were throwing bits of plutonium around in the lunchroom that he got contaminated, and he went back to Washington, D.C. and said, we need to shut this place down, But it was great because it made it look like our film had something to do with the shutdown. And I think ultimately it did, but not directly the FBI raid.
Well, yeah, that's one of the powers, obviously, of media and film, in the sense that it can kind of start the wave of action, or kind of wave of awareness. You know, in mentioning the kind of struggle to get the film on PBS, we often hear from documentary filmmakers about how long films try to take, and obviously there's so much perseverance involved. Much like even nuclear activists and trying to make change in the world. You know, Going back to that time, like how when you're running into these kind of obstacles, like what's the thing that kind of keeps moving you ahead, and I guess believing that things will eventually turn out okay as a filmmaker.
I don't know exactly what keeps us going. Maybe stubbornness. I think one of the key characteristics of documentary filmmaking is perseverance and refusal to take no for an answer. I mean, we wanted to film at Rocky Flats. We wanted to film inside Rocky Flats. We wanted to film inside Diablo Canyon as it was being built. And these were two sort of impossible things. We were convinced that we could stop Diablo Canyon, but Rocky Flats would keep going at the time. But in fact, the opposite happened. Rocky Flats was closed, and Diablo Canyon is still going way after its license should have run out. But Newsom gave it a a couple more years. So I don't know. I don't know exactly how to answer that. I was obsessed with the nuclear issue for 10, 15 years. I mean, we made a separate film about Karen Silkwood. Later, she was originally going to be part of Dark Circle, but it was just too many locations and too many people. We ended up with 3 major locations: Rocky Flats, Diablo Canyon, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And turns out Karen Silkwood was just a little too much in Oklahoma, but we made a separate film about her. So the whole time period for me, which was full of nightmares and Armageddon fears, lasted a long time, and probably 20 years, because it included the film being shunned by broadcasters and being poo-pooed by the nuclear industry lobby organization, the Atomic Industrial Forum. And, us being second guessed and questioned by the PBS powers that be, who now admit that this was just the tip of the iceberg and that they were wrong to keep us off the air. But what was great was that by the time it finally got on POV, it had a huge audience. And we also had theatrical distribution by then. And it had been on Bravo Cable in '86. So it's just this long winding road. You never know where it's gonna lead, but you just push and hope and lobby for your own, what you consider to be the truth about the subject. That's it.
But yeah, and I imagine that maybe some of that also kind of increased its kind of long-term impact, in the sense that sometimes, the resistance is the thing that kind of allows the trajectory to go even further.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Looking back, what would you say, would you be able to kind of provide a little bit of the epilogue for the film of like, how do you think things have kind of evolved in both with nuclear power and nuclear weapons, but also just kind of activism in relationship to the nuclear industry, since the film was done, and what should we maybe be thinking about nowadays?
Good question. Yeah. At the time we finished the film, which was in the fall of '82, and it premiered at the New York Film Festival, a big deal. And it played at Sundance in early '83 and won the grand prize. At that time, anti-nuclear weapons activism was at a height. And there was a huge demonstration in Central Park, 100,000 people. So that was a big groundswell that we rode on. We had started the film enough in advance to finish it right at the height of that. Nuclear power was still at that time expanding, but lucky for us, although we lost the Diablo Canyon battle, there hasn't, to my knowledge, there hasn't been another nuclear power plant licensed in the United States since then. There might have been one in Arkansas, but anyway, the nuclear power industry has been hammered not only by increasing activism against this incredibly toxic way to boil water to create steam to make electricity, creating waste that lasts 250,000 years. Thank you very much. It's not green, it's not clean, and everybody knows at this point it's not cheap. So that industry was essentially stopped in its tracks. And I think the Diablo Canyon battle and what PG&E had to go through to get that plant opened and how much they had to spend was a warning sign to a lot of utilities across the country that this just didn't pencil out. You know, it's going to be too expensive. So we're going to do something else. Now they're coming up with these so-called small nuclear reactors and fusion, and it's all pie in the sky fantasy. So I'm a little bit disappointed that the activism on the part of nuclear weapons isn't on people's plates as it should be, because we are at a really risky spot in the timeline of nuclear weapons proliferation. There are now 9 countries that have the bomb and that could use it. I don't know if you've ever read this book. It's a fantastic book that just came out called Nuclear War, A Scenario. And it's really great. I think her name is Annie Jacobson, the author. It's a page turner. It's a thriller. I hope that there's a fiction film made about it because it is terrifying. Basically the assumption in the book is that the North Korean nutcase launches a missile at the United States, which is very possible, and starts basically a third world war, and it destroys the planet. So there's no such thing as a limited nuclear war. If Putin drops a bomb on the Ukraine, finally, after frustration and so forth, it'll expand. I mean, it will expand. It will not leave us untouched. So it's scary. At the time that we made the film, the atomic clock by the Union of Concerned Scientists was at 8 minutes to midnight. Now I think they have it set at 90 seconds to midnight because of the risks. So there's a wonderful group called Back from the Brink. I encourage everybody to look up Back from the Brink, which has been working over the years to establish a groundswell of grassroots support for very common sense political decision making, i.e., no first strike, which we still as a nation have not agreed to. We have not agreed that we're not going to strike another country first. And that means that everybody else has to say that they're going to strike first if we are, they're going to do it too, or if necessary, they will do it to protect themselves. And zero nuclear weapons. Let's get it down. You know, there's a lot fewer weapons than there were when we finished the film. There were 26,000 or 52,000, I forget. Each side had thousands. Now each side has about maybe 6,000. And the so-called rogue nations have a few. And some of them we don't know for sure whether they have a working nuclear weapon, but we think maybe they do. So it's scary, and it ought to be on people's radar. And so that I'm really glad that you thought of this, Chris, that this is the close to the 40th anniversary of this film coming out, and it's still relevant. That's what's sad. It's still relevant. So I'm glad you saw it.
Yeah, most definitely. I think, one of the things that it also takes me back of like just how much, under the radar these issues are at the moment, or at least in many circles, and so not only do I think just it's it's kind of a a time capsule, but just a really beautiful film, and so I think it really um, shares a story that's worth kind of reflecting on. Before I forget, I guess how did you kind of prepare yourself emotionally to go to somewhere like Hiroshima and kind of like navigate that part of the story?
Right. Originally, we were just focusing on the United States. We picked the Rocky Flats nuclear plutonium factory, um, and the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, which was under construction at the time. But then an opportunity came up in 1979 for us to go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki with a YMCA peace group. We had contacts with the folks that put this trip together, and they invited us to go along and film interviews with survivors of the bombing of those two cities. And at the time that we went, everyone was telling us, all the survivors and everyone was telling us that we were the first American film crew to actually go to these cities and have enough respect to ask for these stories and get these stories on film. We didn't believe it until we just kept hearing it over and over again, and it turned out to be true. What you just saw were the first stories ever filmed by Americans in Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and it took that long, from 1945 to 1979, for us to get our heads out of the sand and find out what we had done, American genocide in those cities. And so when Oppenheimer came out, I was especially annoyed. I mean, that's to put it mildly, at the sort of the character development. And yeah, I get it that you want to do character development on these nerdy physicists who developed the bomb and had all kinds of their own motivations for doing so, and competition and the affairs and the this and the that. But to not even add a line in the credits about how many people had been killed by these bombs and injured, and what the fallout has been since then in deaths and cancers, to not even include anything when the film went so big, and they could have really done it right, and they didn't. So we, coincidentally, we did an HD remaster of Dark Circle in 2018. I felt like, okay, this film is going to fall off the radar unless we put it in a decent digital form. And so the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Academy Film Archive, donated a fabulous HD scan, which you just saw. And we cleaned up the frames, each frame, not the stock footage, because that had dust and scratches and we just left that, but the stuff that we had shot. So it took several years. And by 2020, right as COVID started, First Run Features took on the HD remaster to distribute it virtually. So this, at the 4-Star, when we do the 4-Star screening, it's the world premiere of the HD remaster of this 38-year-old movie, and I'm really grateful that it's programmed.
Well, thank you. And for those of you that watched the film online before that screening, no, you can still come out to the 4-Star and enjoy the screening live and in person there. And as we wrap things up, Judy, you've had kind of made a lot of great films over the years. What are the best ways for folks to kind of continue to follow your work and kind of dig deeper into your filmography?
Okay, well, I've made 4 feature documentaries and many, many shorter films. But the 4 feature documentaries are the ones I'm most proud of, and each one of them has a little bit of me in it. I didn't mean it like that. I mean, I didn't intend for it to happen. It just happened. And Dark Circle was the first one, which I narrated. That was very rare at the time, and kind of taking a risk. But since then, documentaries have really gained traction with people, and they like hearing from filmmakers, even if it's not in a major way. So the other films that I've made are The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill and Pelican Dreams, about my favorite big bird.
Mhm.
And just most recently, Cold Refuge, about swimming in San Francisco Bay, and focusing on people who have real challenges and who get some solace and some centeredness from swimming in the bay. So you can find out about my films by going to my nonprofit, which is called pelicanmedia.org. And pretty soon, because we did a 4K restoration of Wild Parrots, and that was also donated by the Academy Film Archive, that will soon be streaming, because Kino Lorber, I'm here to tell you first, Chris, this is news. Kino Lorber just picked up the film for
Oh,
distribution
nice.
for the 4K restoration. So it's not on streaming platforms right now, Wild Parrots, but it will be very soon.
Very cool. Well, each of those tell some very unique and just really great stories. So yeah, folks kind of delve in. And Judy, thanks again for being part of the festival.
Thank you. Thank you so much.